almost all here, so thank you for your patience. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this spotlight on critical minerals. I am delighted to be joined here on stage with Elmer Schaller, Minister of Foreign Affairs from Peru, Anna Cavazzini, Chair of the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection, Greens IFA Parliamentary Group at the European Parliament. We also have Andrew Force, Executive Chairman at Fortescue. And then, of course, we have Helen Clark, member of the Elders Foundation and former Prime Minister of New Zealand. So maybe we frame the subject. We have 45 minutes. I also want to hear from you, everyone in the audience. So we have about half the time for that. But rare earths are really among the most critical raw materials on the planet. So that we can all agree on, deeply embedded in technologies that now underpin modern life. With obscure names, which I have a very difficult time pronouncing, especially on TV. A lot of them are used from iPhones to MRI machines, but more recently, demand has also been propelled by the green tech that's helping to cut carbon emissions. And US President Donald Trump has homed in on the mineral riches of Greenland, mooting a potential takeover of the Danish territory. He's also expressed a desire to arrange a deal with Ukraine. So over the next 45 minutes, we'll try and figure out exactly what the challenges are geopolitically. There's this underlay of geopolitics in everything that we do. Andrew, let's start off with you. What is needed to actually satisfy this growing demand for critical minerals?
Well, three things. One is that Europe and buyers around the world really stick to and promote the European Sustainability Directive. If you walk away from human rights, if you walk away from protecting the environment, you're going to get toasted by the marketplace. You're going to wind up with a monopoly supplier, someone who doesn't care about human rights, someone who doesn't care about the environment. And from a consumer perspective, you've dug your own grave. Second is the London Metal Exchange should differentiate between minerals like nickel or cobalt, which come from areas which have devastated the local environment, which have ruined the livelihoods of coastal communities. They should not be ranked the same as those who are highly responsible. And buyers should know we're getting a discount here because we're buying absolute rubbish, and we're paying a small premium here because we're getting environmentally and human rights responsible. And the third is the really big one, and I want to say it to the entire fossil fuel sector. Pushing down on hydrogen and persuading everyone that we needed to stick with what we know. Don't you understand there's a war in Europe? Don't you understand there's a war in the Middle East? Therefore, let's stick with what we know, oil and gas. It's your friend. That's rubbish. That's absolute rubbish. You did collectively get rid of the demand for hydrogen. Well done. But that set the world back. Hydrogen is the fuel of the future, without any doubt. Burning oil and gas is going to be seen like wizened old men burning sticks and logs, in the end. I mean, there is a new future here of totally sustainable energy, green hydrogen. The cost of it, we're a producer, the cost of it's coming right down. And I say to the world, if you don't need all the critical minerals, and you don't need any conflict minerals to make hydrogen. It replaces the huge demand for batteries, which is growing with something which is utterly sustainable.
Many question marks about hydrogen, which maybe we'll get back to. Anna Cavazzini, can you talk to us a little bit about how much more critical minerals are needed, first of all, and how do you see the challenges of growing that demand?
Yes, there is a growing demand also for the energy transition, as we just heard. But of course, first and foremost, I would say we need to work on reducing the demand. Because, for example, we still have an overconsumption of resources in Europe. If you think about it, we would need 3 Earths to cover basically all the raw materials or critical raw materials demands. So we need to make sure that we use circular economy as a tool in order to recycle, to have a longer living products, and to make sure that we reuse them after. And I think this is the first task for us. And I think we have already put on European level quite good regulation in place. For example, the eco-design, Ursula von der Leyen suggested a new Circular Economy Act for next year. So this is crucial. Then secondly, I think we have to prioritize. critical raw materials are important for really strategic sectors, but they could also be used for normal consumer goods. And I think if we have very little of them, it probably makes sense to prioritize a little bit. And then thirdly, of course, we have to think about how to diversify and responsibly source them. And I could not agree more with Andrew. I think it makes sense from a human rights and environmental point of view, but also from a business point of view to have a clear, predictable framework.
Minister, how do you see the main challenges? Again, there's an overlay of human rights, but also geopolitics that seems to be getting more complex by the day.
Well, thank you very much for having me in this very important panel about critical minerals. And as you can expect, coming from a developing country, we see this issue also on the developmental side. This is, of course, a very important opportunity for countries like Peru to really achieve what we all want. I mean, when I say we all, not only the Peruvian government, but also, I think in general, the international community, which have stable and wealthy, socially wealthy societies that can live off this extraction of critical minerals, critical in the sense that are needed for the revolution, the Industrial Revolution 4.0 and 5.0, which is also coming. So I think that we have to have, as just stated by the first gentleman who spoke, we have to have an exploitation of these minerals in a way which is socially and environmentally sound, because we want a resilient industry to be built upon, not extract everything and then just go away and have just a very nasty hole living back there. No? So this is quite important, and for that, it is a very essential nature to have a international framework, no? In order to see how can we exploit those things, those minerals in the better way. An example, in Peru, we have concessions already given, granted to many companies and also small miners, but the actual exploitation of these concessions amounts to only 1%. So you have 99% of concessions which are given because they with high probability, they see that there's some minerals there, some interest, some economic interest there, which are not yet exploited. So the potential is great, and I don't think it is different in other parts of the world. So I think we have enough resources to go ahead with our technological revolution, but we have to do it in an orderly fashion.
Helen Clark, what do you see as critical, as really needed to meet this growing demand?
Well, I guess the hat I have here today is as chair of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which has 55 countries, including Peru, implementing a good governance standard over extractives. And we have become obviously extremely interested in the issue of critical minerals because there is a gold rush on for them. And when there's a gold rush, corners are cut. And you run the risk, in essence, not of an era of peace and prosperity, but conflict and division as corners are cut, communities are disrupted, environments are polluted, and so on, things are done the wrong way. I completely agree with Twiggy Forrest about the role that green hydrogen can play. I also agree with Anna. We have to reduce demand because on the current levels of demand that we have for energy and the knowledge that we have about the technologies which would use the critical minerals, we just can't do it without creating mayhem in the gold rush. One of the pieces of research EITI commissioned looked at where are the bulk of the permits for exploration now. Overwhelmingly in protected land, our national parks, reserves, etc., and lands of interest to Indigenous people and local communities. Now, that sends red flags up straight away. So I think looking at hydrogen as providing real alternatives, reducing demand, and then absolutely putting in good governance standards around access to the minerals is just so important. Otherwise, we face some very significant challenges.
Anna Cavazzini, can you, I mean, there are two actually frameworks, right, that have been very important in the space. One is the Mineral Security Partnership. The other one is the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you think, you know, the successes, but also the shortcomings of those work? Because that could help have a blueprint for the future.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is obviously an US-led initiative, and of course it's great, but I think we also need to make sure that we're not overly dependent only on the US. Also, we heard the speech yesterday, so we don't even know if the US is continuing this initiative. So I think it's important to have universal initiatives, multi-stakeholder partnerships, but also, of course, UN processes and in the European Union legislation. And I also see our negotiator, my former colleague who actually did negotiate the Critical Raw Materials Act. And I think it's great that we have at the European Union a strategy where we identify what are critical raw materials, where do we need, in which sectors, and how do we diversify. And I think this is very important just to know a little bit where we are going at the European Union. I see the risk and the shortcoming that it's not basically filled up with money at the end. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have the global gateway, and theoretically the EU has also some financial tools. But of course, when it comes to competition with China, let's be honest, we don't have the same financial means. This is a shortcoming, and I still see the risk. And this is what we always have at the European Union level. We have great strategies and ideas on the EU level, but then still a lot of member states do a little bit what they want. So it's really, really important that we cooperate and that we act as one on the European level when it comes to critical raw materials.
Andrew, how do you see US policy changing in this field under the new administration? There was an executive order that was already signed for some of them. Will we get more?
Yeah, I think it's the rank amateur business person who lobbies politicians to lower standards because they have no care for their customers. They might be looking at a short-term increase in profitability for the long-term destruction of the industry. They'll be gone. They'll have their bonuses that have retired, but they'll leave the industry in disarray. I want to project to political leaders around the world, new and old, that if you walk from standards of human rights or don't elevate them, and if you walk from environmental standards, you're going to sink your own customers. You're going to sink your own voters because you will be pushed straight into monopolistic supply chains, and the losers will be your customers and ultimately your company.
Minister, how do you see some of these policies changing? And again, geopolitics, seems to really have been coming at the forefront for this administration.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I have to say that Peru is an active member of both schemes, the American initiative and also the European one. And we think it is very positive in general terms to mobilize also financial resources towards a rational and environmentally sound exploitation of critical minerals. Geopolitics, yes, it meddles also always in things like that are strategic for the future of society as a whole. And I think we ought to leave these things alone. I know that there has been going on some very strong talks about and on China being an important world actor in those things. But hopefully we have many strong firms that in a free market economy will be able to compete in a very productive way, and productive for everybody, for the consumers, for the producers themselves. They have to make profit, of course, and also for those people who live in those areas where minerals are exploited. So geoeconomics and playing geopolitics with such things as critical minerals, it's very, and I will use a play of words, too critical to be done. I think we ought to put it aside as possible. And I think these two schemes, the European one and the American one, go in that direction.
Helen Clark, do you think, first of all, that there could be a global framework, right? Or that it does feel more different, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe critical minerals can be put to one side.
Well, the international community doesn't agree on a lot of them at the moment, and whether it would agree on a framework around critical minerals, I think, is highly problematic. I mean, there is a gold rush on, and different interests are after it. I think, as Andrew Forrest has said, the issue for the EU, it has a framework. It can insist on human rights and a lot of safeguards and so on. But not every purchaser is going to be insisting on those things. To what extent will the US, in its current mood, insist on any of that? To what extent would China? I've just been focusing in recent days on a bit of a gold rush that's starting in the South Pacific. They're around the Penryn Basin, largely in the territorial waters of the Cook Islands. There's one of the most significant tranches of critical minerals in the seabed. And the Chinese have just signed an agreement for exploration with the Cook Islands government. Total population 12,000, capacity not great, for exploration there. Now, this will send a lot of red flags up around the Pacific. So the geopolitics is real, the competition is great, and not everyone will observe good standards.
Andrew?
Yeah, so look, two things. One is, if you're not doing the things which the former Prime Minister spoke of, then you're going to hurt your marketplace. And I want to say to all the so-called entrepreneurs in politics that I'm not woke. I'm a hardcore business person. I look for the long-term value of my shareholders. Therefore, we back the environment and we back human rights. Second, ideologically, I'm not going to get caught saying you shouldn't mine the seafloor. But firstly, Prime Minister, I'm going to say with the same environmental standards as you do on land, i.e. longitudinal environmental testing, making sure you understand the habitats over several seasons and years, making sure you understand exactly what you'll be doing to those marine ecosystems, like we do in responsible countries in terrestrial environments. Now, if you say, oh, well, I can't do that, I just want to get to those nodules, I say, well, forget it. I mean, that's not being an entrepreneurial, that's not being a responsible supplier. That's just being a total jerk who doesn't care. I mean, basically, if the Cook Islands or all of these marine sources of potential oceanic sourced minerals have companies who want to just put aside all the ecological and environmental safeguards which you've got to do on land before you go open up a mine in responsible countries, then honestly, I just couldn't disrespect you more. And if they say, yeah, but there's a market, Andrew, you've got to get to it, say, well, fine, but apply the same environmental standards on land as you do on sea.
And just
saying you can't, it's not an excuse.
Yeah, Helen
follow
Clark?
on from what Andrew's saying, I think I'm right in saying that the vast majority of the deep sea has not been researched. We actually don't know much about the ecology. We don't know the risks that we're running. I heard a presentation on the margins of the General Assembly last year from Costa Rica, for example, where it was discovered that there was a particular species, the only place in the world it bred was in a particular area in the deep sea off Costa Rica. Now, if you decide to mine there, you put a species into extinction. So, in a way, deep sea mining moratorium made tremendous sense because we don't know enough about the habitats and what we're putting at risk.
Yeah, and
I have one. Let's move on. Let's move on to China, then we'll come back because then I have just one final question on China in terms of cooperation and security, and then we also have questions from the floor. And when you look at the recent export restrictions from China, what are the economic and security implications of that for critical minerals?
I mean, obviously, they are a reaction to the Trump tariff announcement, and so you see already the diametral harmful effects of such a unilateral policy and basically scrapping all international rules. I think it would be much more useful to cooperate with the US on the question of how we can address issues like over production of some, like steel or some other areas. to really address the concerns, but not come up with tariffs and then basically provoke counter reactions that then have, again, other effects on everyone in the world. So I think this is the prime example of how dangerous it is. But on the other hand, coming to export restrictions, we have to also probably be a little bit more honest in the European Union to ourselves. And I'm really interested in your perspective, because I hear the countries in the global south saying the main issue is value creation on the ground. So we don't take the resources out and bring them to Europe and and develop here our batteries or whatsoever. And of course, there can be legitimate tools like export restrictions. There can be also tools like technology transfer. And here the European Union is very shy. So we need to also sometimes listen a little bit more to the partners in the global south if we want to compete with China.
Minister?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think words or concepts like restrictions, tariffs, or taxes are very bad business for everybody and very bad news for everybody. We consumers do not take advantage of that, and we producers either. And it is absolutely true that we would like to have an incremental strategy in how to go ahead and produce more value added in our own countries. But I'm no expert in mining, but I know that it's highly complex. These facilities are highly complex, technologically very advanced, and you cannot say, look, I have the mineral, I have the ores here, and you can exploit them, but then you please do put a refining facility the next week or so. I'm being just a little bit ludicrous, perhaps, and do make value-added things here in my country, in Peru, for example. This is not the way that we should look at things, but rather in a long-term perspective. I think this is very important. Environment is of the utmost importance, and also human rights. But human rights is also the right to development, the right to have certain wealth from what you are extracting from the ground. And there, technology transfer, for example, instead of restrictions or export prohibitions, is, I think, a wonderful tool that we can incrementally utilize in our country. So it is a win-win situation when the partnership is really seen that we are only one whole. We are not consumers and producers. We're not competitors. We are one whole. And when we see ourselves like that, I think it's a win-win situation.
Thank you so much. Hands up for a question. Yes, I think we have microphones. Yeah, gentleman here. And then
Professor Gordon Flake from the University of Western Australia, Mr. Forrest's home state there. First off, I think the broader discussion in this two-day Munich Security Conference on critical minerals in Greenland and Ukraine seems somewhat bizarre. You know, they're readily available in Peru. They're extremely available in the world's largest natural resource province in Western Australia. The notion that we need to find them under the snow or in a war zone kind of misses the point. But the question I want to ask the panel is about processing, because rare earths are not necessarily rare. You know, the geographic distribution is very wide, and the demand for them is very wide, from cell phones to advanced communication to electric cars, etc. The question is processing. And it seems to me if we're not talking about processing, we're not really talking about, you know, the challenge of critical minerals. And today, on almost every one of the full spectrum of critical minerals, 70 to 90% of the processing takes place in one country only, and that is China. So even before Trump tariffs and retribution, there was deep anxiety in manufacturing countries like Japan and Korea about the availability of these critical minerals for communications, for advanced communications, for renewable technologies, and for defense industry. We're at the Munich Security Conference, after all. So my question is, what does the world need to do to ensure that we have a diversification of processing of rare earths, not just extraction?
Well, this is where the development benefit is going to come for developing countries. You know, with the West getting very interested in diversifying supply chains, if it just applies a dig it up and ship it out approach, that doesn't do much for domestic resource mobilisation, jobs, human development, and the rest of it. I mean, the World Bank is quite seized of the importance of this, as I understand it, through the interactions we have with them at the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Very interested in seeing, how they can support developing countries to get the frameworks in place to get that downstream processing and opportunity for their people. So, domestic resource mobilisation is critical for developing countries. These industries do offer a considerable potential for that, but they will undersell themselves if they only allow themselves to be mined and have it all shipped out.
Minister?
Well, yeah, I fully agree with you. I mean, but again, this is a something that we have to see as an incremental process, and we have to start now. I mean, as you rightly pointed out, Professor, I don't know if 90%. It's okay? All right.
All okay.
Okay, nobody heard.
Okay.
And a large percentage of the processing of these critical minerals that do take place in China, and we have to start diversifying this. But we have to think, why did we not do this before? And this is basically because of economic reasons. And so we have to refocus what are the economic advantages and how we see the economic advantages of doing things the way we were doing. And then many keywords come into play. For example, so-called nearshoring, for example, no? Or now I don't like it very much, but there's also another concept called friendly shoring. The thing is, we have to diversify our capacities. If China was able to do that, I think every single country in the world can be potentially also a place where processing of critical minerals can take place.
Thank you. We have two other questions here in the front row, and then one at the back. Yeah, the gentleman here in the front row.
Thank you very much. My name is Yaki Silia. I work at the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. We look at regional trends and stuff. And in our region, obviously, the conflict that has gained a lot of prominence is what's happening in the eastern Congo, the Kivus, where you have, on the one side, legitimate interests of Rwanda on security. You have an absence of governance from Kinshasa, which is 1,700 kilometers to the west. And an economy that is entirely informal and that is linked across regions and across borders. Now, I know that the essential problem is the lack of governance from Kinshasa on the Congo. We all know that. But there are like 200 armed groups in the area. What can we do in the absence of governance from Kinshasa in trying to move this forward? Because there are literally millions of people that earn their livelihood from alluvial mining, from critical minerals that are then exported through Kinshasa, through Rwanda and so on. It's now becoming, as you would all know, an area of intense conflict, and that is destabilizing the whole region. So any great ideas would be appreciated.
Helen Clark, and you can maybe give the microphone here.
Rwanda exports a lot of minerals which clearly have not been extracted from its own soil, which tells us quite a lot. And the reach of government from Kinshasa is not great. And it is a case where unregulated extraction of minerals is driving conflict. And just as, oil extraction has driven conflicts in other parts of the world, or diamonds in other places, I mean, it needs a regional framework. Ideally, Rwanda would come into the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. We would try to sort these things out, help the two countries to sort out a framework for what's happening. But at the moment, it's gangland. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo is a member of the EITI, but if the reach of government isn't great into the area, then the disciplines, rules and regulations that go with being EITI compliant don't really apply there in practice. So anything that can be done to strengthen governance capacity in DRC, I think, would be the way forward.
Yes, hello. My name is Nicola Beer. I just wanted to give some short information as the European Investment Bank. Where I'm overseeing also the critical raw materials as Vice President, is now supporting as the financing arm of the European Union the EU strategy for critical raw materials. So we stepped up in this part. We have a dedicated task force now with a one-stop shop. So every project which is interesting in partnering just can click on our website with its request for financing. We stepped up also the financing. We did $1 billion last year. We stepped up now for $2 billion every year are foreseen, and have already a very vivid pipeline of $3 billion with projects to develop. I just wanted to ensure that this financing partner, because we always crowd in, especially private capital, so it's really to risk mitigation, but what we are for that this financing only comes with projects which respect the current regulation in the EU, which means especially the standards for working conditions, environmental, sustainable projects. And this is for all the 4 pillars. So, I mean, we have not only mining and processing, this is also then when it comes up to recycling and substitution. And I think this is also a reason for mitigation by public money in a certain part, because we are maneuvering in a very fast developing surrounding, because you never can really predict the prices, not only because of the market manipulation of some of the materials, especially by China, but also because of what is the impact of new innovations, for example, in substituting some of the materials which in the future is not anymore necessary to mine or to process, because you have totally different materials. And I think this is a very smart approach. What European Union, also with the support of the Investment Bank Group, wants to achieve is to be the better partner on the ground, because we are respecting that there is an added value on the ground, also by skilling, reskilling the persons around, so that we do not see the model we often saw in the former times, that the population on the ground didn't have anything from the money and from the materials which were mined. It was all shipped away. Nobody had an advantage. And I think that this model, together with partnerships outside the European Union, is a very sustainable and responsible one.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. Anna Cavazzini, can I ask, in terms of public-private partnerships, what is one tool that can further enhance that, given the supply chain security we need?
Yeah, I think some of the problems that were also described are also because we have still a lack of transparency in supply chains. And I think all the public-private partnerships that are there, I think at the end you have a little bit the risk of diverging standards and too many standards around. I still think at the end the ultimate goal should be to have like one standard, but nevertheless public-private partnerships, multi-stakeholder initiatives can of course play an important role, because also of course with the companies on board they can add their practical experience. But to my knowledge, very, very often really at the end lacking transparency and know really where at the end the material is coming from, and are they really sustainably mined, or are they fueling conflicts? So we need to increase the transparency. I think this is number one requirement for all the other policies that are built on that.
Thank you so much. We have a question here. John, there on the second row.
Thanks, Francine. It's John Defterius, a senior fellow at the World Economic Forum Center for Energy and Materials, and was emerging markets that are based in the Middle East with CNN. A question on processing to follow up on the previous point. Saudi Arabia is making a very large play here to create the super region from Central Asia to Central Africa, and sits on $2 trillion of critical minerals. And the U.S. seems to be backing this effort as a counterbalance to China to set up processing out of the kingdom. And is this a good security blanket after what we saw with Russia, Ukraine, and the weaponization of natural gas? I'd love to hear from Peru, because they have their sights on Latin America partnerships, as you well know as well. And Andrew, I'm sure you'd love to weigh in on this, because I've heard comments in the past. Is it realistic as a counterbalance to China, and the quickest way to get there?
Who wants to start? Minister?
Well, let me say that, well, it'll take a while, of course. It'll take a while. I think we ought to give it a try, because when we have 2, 3, or 4 main centers of refinement and the finalizing the product, the cost will also eventually go down, which is also very important economically speaking. So yes, I think it's a good strategy. It could be. I'll be most welcome when this happens in Peru, but it doesn't happen. It mustn't happen in Peru, but it can happen. It must happen in a place where you can have ready access to it, and you are not going to have any politics or let's say other types of non-commercial obstacles, shall we talk this way, in order to go ahead and make a value of what you took out of your territory. So yes, the short answer is yes. I think it's a good strategy.
Andrew?
I don't know. It's an absolutely necessary strategy. As the good professor said, there isn't anything rare about rare earths. I mean, we had a good hard look at Greenland. I don't know why everyone's getting excited about Greenland. It's a large, low-grade deposit. We've got super large, low-grade deposits in Brazil, just across the Gulf to Louisiana. I mean, America could set up very major processing facilities right there. Those deposits, not just owned by us, but they could supply all of North America in a heartbeat. So it's processing which is the issue, and if economies are really serious about it, they should do what China did, make the effort to invest in it, get the expertise, and do the processing. But I really also want to swing it back to, if Europe wants to be highly responsible on lowering the demand for strategic minerals and metals and ensuring responsibility, as I said to my North American friends, Asian friends, etc., then don't listen to the hundreds of millions of bots who have been scattered by the fossil fuel industry, by fossil fuel economies like Russia throughout your Midwest regions, throughout Middle Europe, Middle America, basically saying, you know, don't you realize there's a war in Europe? Don't you realize there's a war in the Middle East? This time we've got to stick with what we know, fossil fuel. You know, that is, these bots pretending to be humans persuaded tens of millions of people on how to vote. And it's just blatantly wrong. Now, I need the big economies to stand up and say, actually, we need to be able to make abundant fuel forever from something which is utterly recyclable, will never run out, and that's water, and sustainable energy. And if people say, well, it's too expensive, then that's because you're listening to bots, because if you send the demand signals out, and I say this to Europe, I say it to North America, you send the demand signals out for green hydrogen, don't be snowed by blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen relies on carbon sequestration. I know a thing or two about mining and geology. It doesn't work. It's a great soundbite for the next idiot to come along to believe in it, but it hasn't worked for 70 years. It's getting more expensive. So support green hydrogen, and you know, you don't need critical minerals to store your energy, and you can store infinite amounts of energy.
But Andrew, I mean, bots or no bots, if President Trump says drill, baby, drill, it's policy.
Yeah, but it's, look, after that, you've got to build, baby, build. And, you know, drill, baby, drill might be great for short-term soundbite, but if you're going to bet your economy on it, you're going to run out of energy, because just finding an oil or gas deposit is the start of the journey. You've got 20 years in front of you now. You're going to have all your Midwest farmers and mums and dads and, you know, people who struggle with a couple of $100 in their bank, and they're going to be competing for energy with those huge companies who have a couple of $100 billion in the bank. And I worry for North America, if you place all your bets on fossil fuel, you're going to lose.
Question at the back.
I'm Carlos Pascual, the head of Geopolitics and International Affairs at S&P Global. Just an aside, Andrew, your point on drill, baby, drill. I mean, just to add to it, I wasn't going to comment on it, but The reality is, if you want to understand what's going to happen in oil markets in the future, look at demand in China. And if there isn't the demand growing in China, you're not going to get the U.S. fossil fuels sector producing more oil and causing the price to go down. And I can assure you that that's one of the things that both Texas and Saudi Aramco are going to agree on immediately. I just wanted to return to the first question on processing, because this is so critical, right? I mean, what's changed, Minister, just comparing to a decade ago, is that now these critical minerals are the foundation for the building of a battery. And without batteries, you don't have the viability of an electric vehicle sector, and you don't have the ability to provide the stability in renewable energy systems with solar and wind that you need to eventually get off of hydrocarbons. And this has created a new bottleneck that wasn't there before. And as a result of it, the fact that, as was indicated before, between 70 to 90% of lithium, graphite, cobalt, rare earths is controlled in China, it's now a national security issue. It has become geopolitical because it's about national security. And I just wanted to go, and particularly Andrew and Anna, come back to you with a question, because one, the speed of it is urgent, but it's not going to happen without private investment. And it has to have a lot of it. So what is a factor driving that? And Anna, the other aspect of it is the regulatory environment of what are the standards that you create for the importation of these processed fuels. Because this is an issue that, if it isn't addressed in some of these ways, China is going to have this monopoly, and it's going to be more entrenched for the next 10 years, because you cannot build a battery today without buying the processed fuel from China.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, so it'll be our two final comments. Do you want to go first, Andrew?
Just, yeah, I'll be very quick. Sir, you're right. We need to invest immediately in processing. If we keep on talking about the raw material, you're going to miss the bus. We've got heaps of raw material. We need processing.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot order processing plants in other countries with a regulation, of course, but I think you can create favorable regulation. And as I said, also think about other tools like technology transfer and financing. For me, these are the key elements in order to get more processing facilities to other places like China. And also, I really think the investment from the European side would be worth it, because we also invest in our independence from China, and it's a win-win situation. Some of the other countries that so far only saw their resources fly out with any value creation can basically also benefit from that. And I think this is the way to go. And this last comment, I could not agree with you more on, again, in Europe, we call it the Green Deal. So basically the regulatory environment that brings us on the green, sustainable decarbonization path, because, yeah, this is the future.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for a wonderful panel, and thank you so much to the audience also for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent panel.